London lay under a veil of cold November fog, its gas lamps shimmering like distant fireflies. At 11:47 p.m., the silence of Chisbury Lane shattered as a frantic knock echoed at Hercule Poirot's townhouse. A trembling young woman, cloak soaked from the mist, whispered only 5 words. "Monsieur Poirot, he's been killed!" Before Poirot could question her, a scream tore through the night. By the time he raced outside, the woman had vanished, leaving behind a single glove and the unmistakable scent of fear. Poirot knew at once someone had sought his help, and someone else had ensured she never spoke. Chapter 1. The Woman in the Fog. For at 11:47 p.m., a sudden violence shattered the peace. A frantic, desperate knock hammered the front door, each strike sharper and more urgent than the one before. Hastings jolted upright, nearly dropping his pencil. Poirot, however, lifted his gaze slowly, as if he had been expecting the interruption all along. "Mon ami," he said softly, "that is not the knock of a man seeking shelter from the cold. That is the knock of desperation." Hastings hurried to the window. "Good heavens, there's someone out there in the fog." Poirot stood, pressing the puzzle box onto the table with gentle finality, and moved toward the door with quick, efficient steps. When it swung open, the fog rushed in like an uninvited guest. Standing just beyond the threshold was a young woman, no older than 25, her cloak soaked through, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. She clutched the doorframe for balance, trembling not only from cold, but from a terror that lived behind her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, each syllable quivering. "Monsieur Poirot, he's been killed." Her voice cracked on the final word, and she seemed to crumple inward, as though the weight of her sentence pressed upon her chest. Hastings caught her arm, steadying her, while Poirot gently tilted his head. Studying her face with an expression equal parts concern and calculation. "My dear mademoiselle," he said softly, "you must come inside. You are safe now." But before Hastings could guide her in, before she could take even a single step over the threshold, a scream split the night. Sharp, chilling, unmistakably near. The woman's head snapped toward the sound, her pupils dilating with renewed fear. Then, without warning, she tore away from Hastings's grasp and fled back into the swirling mist, her cloak whipping behind her like a dark wing. "Stop! Come back!" Hastings shouted, darting into the fog. But Poirot raised a hand. "Non, Hastings, you will not find her. She has vanished like a ghost." And indeed, when Hastings returned moments later, he reported seeing nothing but fog and empty street. Poirot stepped outside, peering into the murk with narrowed eyes. Something on the ground glinted faintly beneath the street lamp's halo. He bent and retrieved it. A delicate glove, pale cream in colour, embroidered with the initials CM. It was daintily made, well cared for, and unmistakably dropped in haste. Poirot turned it over in his hand, frowning thoughtfully. "This woman," he murmured, "did not come merely to warn us of a death. She came because she feared she would be next." Hastings opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the distant clatter of boots echoed down the lane as a constable emerged from the fog at a brisk run. "Inspector sent me, sir," the young constable called. "A man's been found dead at Kensworth Square, stabbed through the heart. No identification, no belongings. Looks like a robbery, but—" He hesitated, "But the inspector thought you might want to take a look." Poirot's brow lifted in interest. "A robbery, you say? And yet the mademoiselle who came here speaks of murder. Curious." He snapped his fingers lightly. "Hastings, the coat. We must make haste." Minutes later, they were in a cab rattling through the fog-choked streets toward Kensworth Square. The city felt suspended in a strange silence, as if watching from behind the mist. Poirot leaned forward, the glove resting carefully on his knee. "Tell me, Hastings," he said quietly, "what impression did the young woman give to you?" Hastings considered. Terrified, certainly. But also guilty, perhaps, or hiding something. Poirot nodded slowly. "She is in fear, yes, but guilt, no. There was no guilt in her manner, only urgency and grief." He paused, and she said, "He's been killed. Not, there has been an accident, not a man is dead." She came with knowledge, direct knowledge. Hastings exhaled. "You think she knew the victim?" "I think," Poirot replied, "she knew far more than she had the courage to say." When the cab pulled into Kensworth Square, the fog parted just enough to reveal a haunting scene. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The square's iron railings glistened with dew, and at the centre a small crowd of constables worked quietly under the direction of a tall, stern-looking inspector, Harold Finch. The victim lay slumped near a toppled lamp-post, his coat torn, his head resting at an unnatural angle. Despite the chill and gloom, the scene bore none of the messy chaos of a street mugging. Everything appeared deliberate, silent, almost staged. Poirot knelt beside the body, examining it with brisk, practiced motions. The wound, one precise thrust to the heart, was clean, efficient, delivered with force, but not frenzy. "This," Poirot said softly, "is the mark of someone who knows exactly where to strike." Finch huffed. "Knives missing, pockets turned out, robbery." Poirot did not dignify that with a response. He leaned closer, touching the man's coat lapel, then lifted it to his nose. "Hastings," he murmured, "do you detect a faint scent? Something floral?" Hastings sniffed. "Violets. Slight, but yes." Finch gave an exasperated sigh. "Perfume. People smell like things. It's London." Poirot ignored him, instead lifting the victim's right hand. Something was clenched in it. Something small and torn, a paper scrap. Poirot pried the fingers open gently, revealing a fragment of notepaper creased and damp from the fog. On it was written only a single incomplete line. "Tell Poirot before—" The rest was missing. Hastings stared. "My God, he was trying to reach you." Poirot's expression grew grave. "Yes, and he was killed before he could." He rose slowly, slipping the scrap into his pocket. Finch scowled. "That now belongs to Scotland Yard." Poirot glanced at him with mild amusement. "Ah, Inspector Finch, the law you represent is admirable, but in this moment I am not handing you this piece of paper." Finch stepped forward sharply. "You have no authority to withhold evidence." "And you," Poirot said calmly, "have no authority to treat me as your subordinate. The evidence will be shared when I have examined all the facts." Finch's jaw tightened in irritation, but he said nothing further. A lamplighter approached nervously. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen," he said, cap in hand, "but I saw something an hour ago. A woman, running. She looked scared out of her wits." Poirot turned sharply. "A woman? Yes, sir. Cloak blowing behind her. Headed down the East Lane." Poirot exchanged a meaningful look with Hastings. "The mademoiselle?" Hastings nodded. "Must be." Poirot's mind raced. A woman arrives at his door before the body is even discovered, trembling, terrified, claiming a man has been killed, then flees at the sound of a scream. Minutes later, the dead man is found with a message meant for Poirot. Either coincidence, unlikely, or someone intended for her to never speak. Poirot crouched again, this time running his fingers along the ground around the body. No signs of a struggle, he murmured. The victim did not fight. Therefore, he knew the killer, or he was taken by complete surprise. He studied the man's shoes, polished, expensive. The coat finely tailored. This was not a man who lived on the streets. Whoever he was, Poirot continued, he was of respectable means. And yet he carried no wallet, no papers, nothing to identify him. Curious, Finch cut in sharply. Pickpocketing. Poirot rose slowly and faced him. Pickpockets do not stab with surgical precision, mon ami. They are opportunists, not assassins. The constables shifted uneasily. Finch reddened. Hastings tugged Poirot aside. Do you truly think the woman knew him? Poirot nodded. Without a doubt. And she came to you for help. Oui, Hastings. And now she is lost in London's fog, pursued by someone who would kill a man to keep her silent. Poirot looked back toward the glove in his coat pocket. This glove, the scent of violets, the torn message, all are threads. We must gather them before the killer does. Before Hastings could reply, Poirot suddenly tensed, glancing toward the shadowy edges of the square. A figure, a tall silhouette, stood half hidden behind the fog, watching. Just watching. Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed. The figure turned abruptly and slipped away between the hedges bordering the museum grounds. Poirot took a single step forward. Hastings, he said quietly, we are not alone tonight. Shall I follow him? Hastings whispered. No, whoever he is, he will not be caught in the fog. But he has made one mistake. He revealed himself too soon. Poirot folded his arms, his breath visible in the cold air. The mademoiselle came to warn us. The victim died trying to reach us, and now someone watches our every move. He exhaled slowly. This, Hastings, is no simple murder. It is a message, and Hercule Poirot has received it. The night deepened, the fog coiled thicker, and Kensworth Square fell silent once more. But Poirot's mind burned with clarity. A terrified woman, a dead man with an unfinished plea. A watching stranger, a glove marked CM, the scent of violets. And somewhere in the city, a killer moving silently, plotting their next step. Poirot turned away from the square, coat buttoned tight. Come, Hastings, the game has begun. Chapter 2. Shadows in Kensworth Square. The fog had thickened by the time Poirot and Hastings left Kensworth Square, curling through the streets in slow, sinuous waves, like a living thing that wanted to hide every truth London held. The constables dispersed. Finch muttered orders with his usual brittle irritation, and the corpse was carried away toward the yard. Yet the faint echo of that watcher's departing footsteps stayed with Poirot long after the square itself had fallen silent. They walked slowly along the narrow lane bordering the museum wall, the wet stones clicking under their shoes. Poirot moved with deliberate calm, but his eyes were sharp and alive, scanning the shadows with a predator's precision. Hastings, on the other hand, kept glancing over his shoulder, clearly unsettled. I say, Poirot, that fellow watching earlier, are you certain he wasn't just a curious passer-by? Poirot raised an eyebrow. A passer-by, mon ami, does not lurk in the shadows as though wishing to become one with the bricks. He does not flee at the very moment the great Hercule Poirot turns his magnificent head. Hastings huffed. You always think someone is watching, lurking, hiding. Because, Poirot replied with soft emphasis, someone usually is. They circled the museum's rear courtyard, a space swallowed in gloom, save for a single flickering lantern by the side entrance. The air here was colder, unnaturally so. Hastings drew his coat tighter around himself. No sign of the chap, he murmured. If he came this way, he's long gone. Poirot paused near the iron gate leading to the alley. Long gone, perhaps, but not careless. He knelt and ran a hand across the damp cobbles, examining the faintest sign of disturbance. A smear of mud, incongruous with the otherwise undisturbed stones. Poirot's fingers hovered above it. Fresh, he murmured. A man stepped here minutes ago, straight from the river path, judging by the silt. Hastings stared. How on earth can you tell that? Poirot gave him a small smile. Because, mon ami, this particular mud carries the smell of algae and cold currents, quite unlike the earth of the square. Our observer came from the river approach, watched from behind the hedges, and fled the same way. He knows the area well. Hastings frowned. That means he may have been waiting before the body was even found. Poirot's eyes glinted. Just so. Very good, Hastings. A constable hurried toward them through the fog, cap askew. Detective Poirot, sir. Poirot turned. What is it, my good man? The constable handed him a small envelope, sealed with plain wax. A boy, newsrunner, left this for you at the square. Said it was urgent. Poirot weighed the envelope in his hand. No address, no name, only the faint lingering scent of violets. Hastings stiffened. The woman? Poirot nodded once, gravely. He cracked the seal and unfolded the short message. He didn't die for nothing. The truth is in the museum, but be careful. Someone there knows you were warned. It was unsigned, but Poirot recognized the trembling, uneven script. Clara Mendel, C.M., the woman who fled his doorstep. Rebelling against her fear, she had reached out again. The museum loomed behind them, dark, silent, imposing. Its cold marble and Gothic arches took on a sinister shape in the mist, as if the building itself guarded the secrets within. Poirot tucked the note into his coat. Come, Hastings. It seems our path leads once again into the halls of antiquity. Hastings grimaced. Looks a bit eerie at this hour. The truth, Hastings, is always eerie when it hides in the dark. They approached the museum's heavy-side door. To their surprise, it was ajar, just barely, but unmistakably not fully latched. Poirot pushed it open with a single finger, letting the hinges creak slowly into the empty corridor beyond. The vast marble floor reflected faint moonlight that slipped through the high windows. Their footsteps echoed sharply in the silence, accompanied by the faint drip of condensation from the ceiling onto the stone tiles. Hastings whispered, Should we wait for Finch, or at least send someone for backup? Poirot tilted his head. If we wait for Finch, mon ami, we will also wait for his temper, his incompetence, and his insistence that everything is a simple robbery. No, we proceed. Hastings sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. They moved deeper into the museum, passing display cases filled with ancient pottery, Egyptian scarabs, Roman coins, all locked, all untouched. But Poirot's instinct tugged him toward the east wing, where a row of tall arched galleries housed weaponry from several eras. The deeper they went, the colder and darker the air became. Their breath appeared in front of them as faint white wisps. Suddenly, a soft metallic clatter echoed from somewhere ahead. Hastings froze. What was that? Poirot raised a finger to quiet him. They waited. Silence returned slowly, like a tide receding. Poirot pressed forward, entering the Roman Antiquities Gallery. Here, in glass cases, displayed under brass lamps, rested blades, coins, tablets, and ceremonial artifacts. One display at the far end caught Poirot's eye. A case labelled Recovered Roman Dagger, 1st Century. The glass was cracked. A single thin fracture ran from corner to corner. Poirot leaned in. Observe, Hastings, Someone attempted to break into this case recently." Hastings inspected it, but failed. Poirot shook his head. "No, succeeded." He tapped the velvet pad inside the case. It was empty. The dagger was gone. Hastings's jaw dropped. Good Lord! The museum's most prized piece, stolen! Poirot's face hardened. More than stolen, Hastings. It is connected. He withdrew from his pocket the scrap of paper from the dead man's hand and placed it beside the display case. The handwriting was identical to the labels written by the curator, Adrian Price, if Poirot's memory served him. "The victim, mon ami, worked here." Hastings blinked. "You're certain?" "Positive." Poirot pointed to a small ink stain on the floor, fresh and violet-tinted, the same shade used by the museum's cataloguing ink. "He was here tonight, and he discovered something worth killing for." Before Hastings could respond, rapid footsteps echoed from the hall behind them. Poirot and Hastings ducked behind a column, just as a lantern beam swept across the gallery. Finch stormed into view, flanked by 2 constables, his expression thunderous. "I knew it," he barked. "I bloody well knew they'd come back here." He strode forward, examining the glass case. "Stolen! Of course it's stolen! And who do we find here rummaging about? Brilliant! Just brilliant!" Poirot stepped calmly into the lantern light. "Do calm yourself, Inspector. We did not touch the case." Finch's eyes blazed. "You're out of your depth, Poirot." Poirot smiled mildly. "And you are out of patience, Inspector." Finch waved his men to search the gallery. Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Do you think Finch could be involved?" Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Finch as he barked orders. "Finch is many things, impatient, insecure, territorial, but a killer? No, he lacks the subtlety." Poirot's eyes narrowed as Finch turned away from the broken case. "But he hides something that ties him, unwillingly or not, to the events of tonight." One of Finch's constables approached with a small object. "Inspector, sir, found this on the floor." Finch snatched it. Poirot lifted his chin. "May I?" Finch hesitated, then thrust the object at him with exaggerated reluctance. Poirot held it to the lantern light. It was a scrap of cloth, dark wool, torn from a coat, still bearing a faint scent. Violets, the same perfume the young woman had worn. Poirot inhaled once more, then moved the cloth beneath his nose again, slower this time. Hastings looked puzzled. She must have been here, then. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, but not struggling. Notice, Hastings, this cloth is not from her cloak. It is from a man's coat." Hastings blinked. A man wearing violet perfume? Or a man who brushed against a woman who was drenched in it? Finch eyed Poirot sharply. "What are you getting at?" Poirot ignored him, pacing slowly around the scene, taking in the faint dust disturbed near the base of the case, the slight shift in a nearby pedestal, the grit on the floor that did not belong in a pristine gallery room. Piece by piece, the room began speaking to him, not with words, but with signs. He stopped abruptly. "There were 2 people here tonight," Poirot said quietly. "One who knew the museum well, and one who did not." Finch scoffed. "And how would you know that?" Poirot tapped his finger against a pedestal. "Because only someone unfamiliar with this museum would brush against this statue, which juts out more than the others along the pathway. See the fresh fingerprints on the marble. They belong to someone startled, or perhaps running." Finch stared. Poirot continued. "But the second person, the one who knew the building, they took the dagger without disturbing anything else. And they did not leave in panic. They left with purpose." Hastings exhaled slowly. "So the killer was here earlier tonight?" "Yes," Poirot said, "and perhaps still is." At that moment, a faint clinking sound echoed from a storage corridor at the back of the gallery. Finch's head snapped up. "Who's there?" He motioned his constables forward. Lanterns swung violently as they raced toward the corridor. Poirot and Hastings followed at a measured pace. The corridor was narrow, lined with crates, spare pedestals, and old frames. A side door, leading to the archival staircase, hung open. A cold draught spilled through it. Finch rushed to the stairwell. "Bloody hell! Open window up top! Someone climbed out!" He sent his men scrambling upward. Poirot did not follow. Instead, he studied the open door carefully. "He came this way," Poirot murmured, "but not in haste. The footsteps are too even, too deliberate." Hastings looked down. "I see nothing." "You see nothing because you do not look for what is not there," Poirot replied. "The dust here, undisturbed except for a perfect narrow path. This is someone who walks lightly, purposefully. He fears not being seen. He fears only being pursued." Finch leaned over the stairwell railing. "The bastard's long gone. Windows open. Must have dropped into the yard." Poirot turned his gaze back toward the display hallway, toward the shadows that had been watching earlier in the night. "No, Inspector," he said softly. "He did not drop into the yard. He did not need to. He knows this museum better than any thief, better even than some who work here." Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "He walked out the front door long before we suspected his presence." Finch glared. "You're making this up." Poirot shook his head. "I am assembling what the room has told me." A constable rushed into the corridor, panting. "Inspector, there's a signature in the visitor's log. Someone signed in late tonight, just after closing." Finch snatched the sheet and held it under the lantern light. Poirot stepped closer, his expression tightening. The signature was unmistakable. Elias Worthing. Hastings blinked. "The wealthy patron?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, a man with good reason to fear discovery. And tonight, he was here, before the murder." Finch muttered a curse. Poirot looked toward the cracked display case. "And he has touched the dagger." Hastings asked quietly, "Do you think he killed the man?" Poirot's face grew distant and thoughtful. "No. Elias Worthing is a man of secrets, but not of precision. The killing blow to the victim, so clean, so exact, it was delivered by someone with training, someone who has killed before." He looked out at the fog beyond the doorway. "Worthing is involved, yes, but not as the killer." Hastings frowned. "Then who was the one watching us earlier?" Poirot's voice dropped to a soft murmur. "The killer, Hastings. He stayed close. He wanted to see how much we knew." Poirot stepped deeper into the corridor, eyes narrowing, piecing together the pattern, or the shape of the pattern yet unseen, and now he knows we're following. The museum seemed to breathe around them, ancient and unsettled. Finch barked orders, lanterns flickered, constables searched fruitlessly, but Poirot did not move. His mind raced through the clues like a conductor arranging a symphony. The missing dagger, the terrified woman, the dead man reaching for him, the watcher, the museum receipt, the violet scent, and now Elias Worthing's signature. "That is why," Poirot whispered to Hastings, "the killer fears the Mademoiselle, Clara Mendel. She knows what Adrian Price discovered. She tried to warn us, and she is now hunted." Poirot's jaw set with quiet determination. "We must find her before the killer does." Hastings swallowed. "But where do we start?" Poirot turned to the fog-shrouded doorway, the city beyond it waiting like a labyrinth of secrets. "We start," Poirot said, "where all frightened souls run when the night grows dark." He stepped out of the museum, the London fog parting around him like a curtain. the mademoiselle will run towards someone she trusts. And that, Hastings, is where we shall find her. Chapter 3. Shadows in the corridor. A strange tension hung in the air the following morning, one that no amount of daylight could fully dispel. The dawn light spilled across Hawthorne House in muted gold, but the corridors remained unnervingly quiet. It was as though the ancient manor was inhaling, holding its breath, listening for something. Outside, the grounds were wrapped in mist. Inside, the unease of the previous night clung to every guest. Hercule Poirot, however, moved with serene precision. He adjusted his tie, smoothed back his hair, and stepped into the long eastern corridor with the calm reassurance of a man who trusted logic more than shadows. Mrs. Harrington waited for him at the far end, pale, fatigued, and gripping her shawl as though it were a lifeline. "Another poor night of sleep, madame?" Poirot asked gently as he approached. She gave a thin, shaky smile. "I kept hearing footsteps, heavy ones, stopping near my door." "A trick of the mind, possibly," Poirot said, though he did not dismiss her entirely. "Or perhaps someone wandering with restless thoughts." "Yes, well," she murmured, "restless thoughts seem to plague every soul in this house." Poirot let the comment linger and turned his attention to the problem at hand. Lady Eleanor's death, still without explanation, had pressed a nervous energy upon the guests. Already he had noticed changed behaviours, people speaking in whispered corners, darting glances exchanged, and the persistent air of suspicion swelling like a tide. He was not surprised. Murder, he reflected, always brings out truths people intended to keep buried. Poirot began the morning by examining the eastern wing again. The carpet was thick enough to muffle steps, but dust gathered at the edges, dust that held stories. He crouched, inspecting a spot beneath a window. "Interesting," he mumbled, touching a faint smudge. "A heel mark, light but recent. A woman's shoe, judging by its narrowness." He tapped his finger thoughtfully. Lady Eleanor had been found on the opposite side of the house. So, what woman had been lingering here, late at night or early in the morning, before or after the tragedy? "You look very much like a man who has discovered something disagreeable," said a low voice. Poirot turned to see Mr. Alistair Graves leaning against a doorway, arms crossed, studying him with an unreadable half-smirk. His dark hair was slicked back, his expression polished yet guarded. "Ah, Monsieur Grave," Poirot said, "you move quietly for a man of your build." "And you observe everything for a man who pretends to stroll casually," Graves countered. Poirot gave him a polite smile. "Tell me, where were you last night between 10 and midnight?" "Having a smoke on the terrace," he replied without hesitation. "Mrs. Harrington can confirm. She passed me on her way to bed." "Indeed, she did not mention this." "That woman forgets her own stories half the time," he said dismissively. "Besides, must you question all of us as though we're criminals?" Poirot tilted his head. "But, monsieur, in a house where a woman has died under suspicious circumstances, one must entertain the possibility that someone is a criminal." Something flickered across Graves' eyes. Irritation or fear? Poirot could not be certain, but the man departed swiftly, claiming urgent correspondence to attend to. Poirot took note. Yes, there was agitation beneath the man's well-tailored exterior. By noon, the manor had grown tense with unspoken worry. Mrs. Violet Sinclair tapped her fingers anxiously on the breakfast table, her eyes unfocused. Captain Briggs paced outside like a trapped lion. Mr. Graves remained strangely elusive, and Mrs. Harrington could not keep still long enough to answer a single question thoroughly. Stronger than any of these behaviors, however, was the atmosphere of anticipation. Someone, Poirot suspected more than one, was waiting for him to make a wrong move. Or worse, for him to stop looking entirely. But Hercule Poirot never stopped. He found the butler, Mr. Fenwick, polishing the silver tray in the dining room. The man was tall, stoic, and weathered by decades of service. "A moment, Monsieur Fenwick," Poirot said. "Tell me, who had access to the service corridor last night?" "Everyone, sir," Fenwick answered evenly. "The doors were not locked. They rarely are. Is that wise? It has never been a problem before, sir." Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I ask because someone used it. Someone who did not wish to be seen." Fenwick blinked slowly, maintaining his professional calm, but Poirot saw a faint tightening of the jaw. "Sir, this household has seen no such secrecy in all my years. Perhaps it was merely one of the guests seeking a quiet moment." Poirot looked at him long enough for the butler to avert his eyes. Another small note to file away. It was during lunch that the atmosphere finally cracked. A loud gasp rippled through the dining room as Mrs. Harrington dropped her teacup. The porcelain shattered, spilling tea across the carpet. She was trembling, staring at something tucked under the saucer as though it were a serpent. Poirot hurried to her side. "Madame, are you unwell?" She pointed with a shaking hand. Beneath the fragments of china was a small folded slip of paper, cream-coloured, with an elegant script. Poirot opened it carefully. "You know more than you say. Keep quiet. No signature, no flourish, just menace." Mrs. Harrington began to sob softly. "I knew it. Someone's watching me. Someone has been outside my door at night. I shouldn't have come to this dreadful house." Poirot guided her to a chair and spoke, in a low, calming tone. "Courage, madame. Whoever sent this, he is afraid. And a man who is afraid makes mistakes." Her breath steadied, but her fear did not ease. Captain Briggs slammed his fist onto the table. "This is absurd. We're being threatened like children while the police dawdle." Poirot raised a hand. "Please, Captain, anger will not help us." "What will then?" Briggs snapped. "You, with your little grey cells and endless questions?" Poirot gave him a calm, weary look. "Yes, Captain, they will help us. That much I promise." The room fell silent. When the guests finally dispersed, Poirot slipped away to the library, where quiet reigned and the scent of old paper softened the air. He sat at the long table, fingers steepled, letting the swirl of facts settle. Lady Eleanor had died mysteriously. Mrs. Harrington was being threatened. Someone had walked the eastern corridor late at night. A woman. Graves was defensive. Sinclair was too nervous. Briggs was too angry. Fenwick was too controlled. It was all too convenient. Poirot stared out the tall window, watching the mist slowly burn off the lawn. Someone in Hawthorne House was desperate to hide the truth. And desperation, Poirot knew, always left a trail. He leaned back in his chair, lips curving into a thoughtful, almost gentle smile. "It is beginning," he murmured. "The murderer grows restless." And in that moment, Poirot felt the case unfolding toward him, like a door slowly opening onto a long, dark corridor. A corridor he intended to walk to the very end. Chapter 4. Whispers. Behind locked doors. The afternoon sun strained through Hawthorne House's high arched windows, scattering pale beams of gold across the grand staircase. Yet even sunlight could not ease the tension coiled within the manor's walls. Conversations tapered off whenever footsteps approached. Doors were opened only after careful glances through keyholes. Every creak of the old house felt deliberate, as though someone, or something, moved unseen among the guests. Hercule Poirot ascended the staircase with deliberate calm, counting each step as though preparing his mind for a delicate performance. His instincts told him that the circle was tightening. The threatening note to Mrs. Harrington had accelerated the shift. Fear makes people careless, and carelessness reveals the truth. Poirot reached the landing and paused outside the corridor, where Lady Eleanor's room lay sealed. The constable stationed there nodded respectfully. "No disturbances, sir." "Très bien," Poirot replied softly. "Though I believe the disturbances, they occur elsewhere." He turned toward the western hallway, where the guests' rooms lined up like silent sentries. Somewhere here lay the next piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Violet Sinclair's door stood ajar. Poirot knocked lightly and stepped inside at her murmured permission. She sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with trembling fingers. Her face appeared more drawn than the day before, and her eyes darted nervously to the window. "You wish to see me, madame?" Poirot asked, noting her pallor. She set the brush down with a faint clatter. Yes. I don't know who else to speak to. This house, it feels wrong." Poirot took a chair beside her. "Tell me what troubles you." "I heard voices last night," she whispered, "in the corridor. Hushed, angry voices, a man and a woman. I could not distinguish the words, but I know they were arguing. At what time? Perhaps 11:30. Poirot sat straighter. That aligned with the unaccounted movements he suspected. "And there is more," she continued, twisting her handkerchief. "I saw Mr. Graves outside, near the side gardens. He looked startled to see me awake." She hesitated, as though afraid of her own accusations. "He was wiping something from his coat, something dark." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Did he offer an explanation?" "He said it was mud," she replied, swallowing hard. "But the gardens were dry. You saw the weather yesterday." Poirot considered her carefully. Fear can distort memory, but it can also sharpen it. "Do you believe Monsieur Graves capable of violence?" he asked. Her eyes flickered. "He has a temper, and he and Lady Eleanor argued yesterday afternoon. Something about a letter." Poirot seized the thread. "A letter, you say? Did you hear the content?" "No, but she seemed frightened afterward." Poirot's mind stirred sharply. "Madame, you have been very helpful. If you remember anything else, no matter how small, you must come to me at once." She nodded, though uncertainty clouded her expression. She looked like a woman who wanted to speak more, but feared the consequences. Poirot would not push her yet. Fear, when pressed, only retreats deeper. Stepping back into the corridor, Poirot nearly collided with Captain Samuel Briggs. The captain was flushed, breathing hard as though he had been pacing for hours. "Fancy seeing you loitering around the rooms," he snapped. "Looking for secrets?" Poirot gave him a polite tilt of the head. "I prefer to say I'm looking for the truth." Briggs scoffed. "Truth? In this place? You won't find it by interrogating frightened women." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but frightened women observe much, Captain." Briggs stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're clever. You think this little investigation of yours intimidates me. It does not?" "On the contrary," Poirot replied mildly. "You appear very much intimidated." Briggs stiffened, fists clenching, but he forced a harsh laugh. "Watch your step, Poirot. Not everyone appreciates being treated like a suspect." Poirot offered a small, disarming smile. "And yet, Captain, everyone is a suspect." Briggs stalked away down the corridor, boots thudding with military precision. Poirot watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders. The captain was unravelling. That alone was telling. Not long after, Poirot ventured toward the servants' wing. The long wooden floors creaked beneath his footsteps, and the scent of polish hung thick in the air. At the end of the hall, he found Mr. Fenwick directing two maids silently. The butler straightened the moment he noticed Poirot. "Is there something you require, sir?" Poirot glanced at the maids, then back at Fenwick. "Merely a moment of your time. In private, if you please." Fenwick dismissed the maids with a nod and led Poirot into the pantry. Once the door closed, the butler stood stiffly, hands clasped behind his back. "You run this household with admirable discipline," Poirot began, watching him closely. "You know its secret ways, its comings and goings." Fenwick remained silent. "Tell me," Poirot continued, "why was the service corridor unlocked last night?" Fenwick's throat bobbed. "It always remains so, sir." "But last night someone used it," Poirot pressed. "Someone who wished to remain unseen." Fenwick's gaze slid away. A heartbeat passed, then another. "I saw no one," he said finally, but his voice lacked certainty. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his tone. "Monsieur Fenwick, you are a man of order, routine, precision. Something disrupted that last night. I can see it weighs on you." Fenwick's face twitched, just once. "Sir, I cannot. It is not my place." "On the contrary," Poirot said gently, "it is precisely your place. A woman has died." Fenwick swallowed hard. "Very well." His voice trembled just slightly. "I heard someone in the west corridor around midnight. Soft steps. A woman, I believe. I did not see her face. She moved too quickly." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Did she enter a room?" I think she did. Lady Eleanor's room." Poirot felt the shift, the electric tightening in the air when truth brushes close. "And yet Lady Eleanor was already dead at that time," he murmured. Fenwick looked startled. "Then who—" "That is what we must discover," Poirot replied, stepping past him. "And soon." Poirot returned to the central hall, deep in thought. A woman in the corridor. A letter that frightened Lady Eleanor. Graves wiping something suspicious from his coat. Briggs losing his temper. Harrington being threatened. Sinclair hearing arguments. Too many threads. Yet threads, when gathered carefully, form a pattern. As Poirot reached the staircase, he heard a soft click from behind. He turned sharply. A door at the far end of the hall, Lady Eleanor's study, had shut, though no one should have been inside. The constable was at the opposite end and clearly hadn't noticed. Poirot walked toward it with hushed steps. Just as he reached the door, he heard something from within. A whisper, a rustle, a hurried movement. Poirot's hand hovered over the knob. But before he could turn it, the sound ceased. Silence, complete. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, letting his senses absorb every detail, every faint vibration. Someone had been inside. Someone searching, desperately. For what? He stepped back slowly. "Patience, mon ami," he whispered to himself. "The truth will show itself." And as he walked away, he knew, more certainly than before, that the murderer was no longer simply hiding. They were preparing their next move. Chapter 5. The letter no one should have read the late afternoon cast long shadows across the drawing-room, stretching like dark fingers across the polished floor. Hawthorne House, already suffocating with tension, felt even heavier now, as if the very air resisted movement. Poirot stepped inside the drawing-room with measured calm, his eyes landing immediately on the small writing desk tucked near the hearth. Lady Eleanor had often used that desk. It bore her delicate scent, her elegant stationery, and now, perhaps, her lingering secrets. He opened the drawer, not rifling but observing, letting the object speak. A half-empty bottle of violet ink, a stack of envelopes, a broken wax seal, and beneath them a thin indentation in the wood, as though something, a single sheet perhaps, had recently been removed. Poirot lifted the envelopes, tilting them toward the light. There, a faint scrap clinging to the inner corner. Torn. Overs looked hastily removed. He drew the scrap out and examined it. Only one corner remained, but a single word was still visible in looping handwriting. "To meet?" He frowned. A meeting planned? A rendezvous? Lady Eleanor, fearful before her death, had confided in no one, and yet she had clearly arranged to meet someone important enough to risk secrecy. Poirot placed the scrap back into the drawer and closed it quietly. He had not missed the pattern forming around Lady Eleanor's final hours. Someone had demanded her silence. Someone had panicked when she didn't comply. He turned sharply as the door creaked open. Mrs. Harrington entered, face pale but determined, fingers wrapped tight around something in her hand. "Monsieur Poirot, I must speak with you, please." Poirot guided her to a chair. "You have news, yes?" Her voice quivered. "It's about the letter. The one Lady Eleanor received yesterday afternoon." Poirot leaned forward. "At last we approach clarity. Tell me everything." "I didn't read it," she said quickly, "but I saw it, just barely, as it fell from her hand. It had a distinctive seal. Not a family crest, but a symbol." Poirot's heart stirred. "A symbol? Describe it." "A circle, with 2 lines crossing it, like an old monogram or—" She hesitated. "Or a military mark." Poirot's mind flashed immediately to Captain Briggs. "Madame," he said slowly, "you understand the importance of this?" She nodded, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. Lady Eleanor looked terrified when she opened it. She told me she needed to put something right. Those were her exact words. Poirot rose. "Merci, madame. You have been most helpful." But she reached out, grabbing his arm. "Please, tell me you will protect us. I feel as though I am being watched constantly." Poirot met her gaze with calm resolve. "You have my word." She left, trembling. The door shut softly behind her. Poirot exhaled, mind racing, a letter bearing a mark, military or otherwise. A frightened woman arranging a secret meeting. A death that silenced her. This was no random tragedy. This was a cover-up. Poirot went in search of Captain Briggs. He found him in the billiard room, chalking a cue with unnecessary force. His jaw worked furiously, and he looked up sharply when Poirot entered. "What now?" Briggs demanded. "Another accusation?" "Non, Captain," Poirot said, stepping closer. "Only a question. Where did you serve before the war ended?" Briggs paused. "Egypt, then briefly in the Balkans. And afterwards?" "Various posts," he snapped. "Why does it matter?" Poirot watched him carefully. "Your regiment, did it use a circular insignia? A circle crossed by 2 lines?" Briggs froze, just for a heartbeat. Then he resumed chalking. Many units used similar marks, hardly unique. Poirot's eyes softened. Lady Eleanor received a letter before her death, with such a mark. Briggs's grip tightened on the cue, knuckles whitening. "You think I had something to do with that?" he growled. "She was a fragile woman, yes, but I respected her. She deserved better than all this." Poirot said nothing, simply holding Briggs's gaze. And that silence made the captain falter. "She came to me yesterday morning," he blurted suddenly. "Asked about an old military code. Said someone had threatened her using it. I told her not to meddle. It wasn't her concern." Poirot's skin prickled. "And why would she think you knew about this code?" "Because," Briggs exhaled heavily, I recognized the description, not the sender, but the mark. He set the cue down with a thud. It was once used for covert messages, within a rogue faction during the war. Poirot's eyes sharpened. A faction involved in smuggling artifacts, perhaps, or moving prisoners off record. Briggs didn't answer, but that was answer enough. Poirot stepped closer. You did not send the letter. That much is clear, but you know it was from a dangerous man. Briggs nodded slowly. Yes, someone she should never have crossed paths with. Poirot felt the room shift again, the shadows rearranging themselves into new shapes. "And who is this man, Captain?" he asked quietly. Briggs swallowed. "I don't know his name, only his code name." He hesitated. "They called him the Raven." Poirot's breath caught. A code name. A criminal from Briggs's past. Someone still alive and still dangerous. "And you believe the Raven is here?" Poirot asked. Briggs's voice dropped. "If that symbol appeared, then yes, he's here. And if Eleanor contacted him or uncovered something, God help us all." Poirot absorbed this grim revelation. A hidden figure in the house, perhaps disguised, perhaps using one of the guests as a shield. That explained the whispering in the corridor. The threats, the night movements, someone was growing desperate, and desperation breeds violence. Poirot left Briggs and entered the long corridor, leading toward Lady Eleanor's study. The air felt colder here, as if the house itself recoiled from what lingered in its shadows. He paused before the study door, closed since morning, and reached for the knob. A voice behind him whispered, "Monsieur Poirot." He turned. Mrs. Violet Sinclair approached, her eyes wide, fear etched into every line of her face. "I heard something," she said, "from inside that room. It wasn't an hour ago. What did you hear?" "A drawer opening, papers shifting, someone searching." Poirot stiffened. That room had been sealed. "And you saw no one leave?" "No. But whoever was inside, they are bold. They're not afraid anymore." Poirot nodded slowly. "Merci, madame. You must return to your room and lock your door." She hesitated, then obeyed. Poirot placed his hand against the study door once more, feeling the cool wood beneath his palm. Someone was inside earlier. Someone hunting for the same letter he now sought. The murderer's invisible hand was moving swiftly, and more recklessly. Poirot drew himself tall. "It is time," he whispered. "Time to flush the Raven from the darkness." And he pushed the door open. Chapter 6. The Informant's Shadow. A storm rolled across the Surrey skies that evening, folding the last of the daylight into a murky, blue-grey dusk. The manor's lamps had been lit early, casting long amber streaks across the hallways. Hercule Poirot stood at the foot of the staircase, cane in hand, moustaches pointed like sharpened thoughts. The atmosphere had shifted, no longer merely tense, but swollen with the weight of withheld truth. Inspector Graves joined him, his expression unusually grave. "Poirot, the constable found something behind the gardener's shed, buried shallow. You'll want to see it." Poirot nodded once. "Très bien, lead the way." The two men stepped into the chill wind outside. The air smelled of rain-soaked soil and something metallic beneath. The gardener's shed, an old timber structure, creaked as if protesting their intrusion. Constable Hensley waited there, lantern raised, boots caked in mud. "It was the dog Watt found it, sir," he muttered, nudging a disturbed patch of earth with his toe. Poirot crouched. Graves shone the lantern. Half buried, muddied but unmistakable, lay a silver cigarette case engraved with an intricate monogram. "C.F. Charlotte Farnham," Graves said quietly. "Well, that tightens the noose around her, doesn't it?" Poirot brushed the dirt away with a gloved hand. "Inspector, how often do the guilty bury their possessions so near to the house of crime? This feels too convenient." "Are you saying it was planted?" Poirot gave a slow smile. "I'm saying, mon ami, that the earth is telling a story, but not the one our murderer wants us to hear." They took the cigarette case inside, setting it on a white linen cloth in the study. Thunder grumbled overhead. Poirot stood before the mantelpiece, hands clasped. "Let us gather the household," he said. Within minutes the suspects assembled. Charlotte Farnham, pale yet composed, Victor Harwood, his jaw tight, Mrs. Langford, trembling like a leaf, Oliver Ashcombe, with eyes that shifted too quickly, and Helena Vale, the journalist, scribbling in her notebook. Poirot held up the cigarette case. "This was found buried behind the gardener's shed. It belongs to Mademoiselle Charlotte." Charlotte inhaled sharply. I lost that last week. I never buried it. Someone is trying to frame me." Victor scoffed. "How convenient." Helena leaned forward. "Poirot, may I ask why would anyone plant such an obvious clue?" Poirot smiled softly. "A very good question, mademoiselle. One must consider who benefits from casting suspicion on Miss Farnham." Mrs. Langford wrung her hands. "Charlotte could never harm Mr. Whitcomb. She adored him." "Adoration can sour," Victor muttered. Poirot watched every twitch, every flicker of the eyes. "Let us examine the timing, s'il vous plaît. The cigarette case was buried recently. The soil is still damp only on the surface. This suggests it was placed there after the storm began." Helena tapped her pen thoughtfully. "But everyone was inside during the storm. No one left the house." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Are you certain?" A ripple passed through the room. Before anyone responded, a maid entered timidly. "Sir, there's something else. A note, left on Mr. Poirot's door." She handed it to him with shaking fingers. Poirot unfolded it slowly. "Leave the past buried, or another body will join the first." No signature, no flourish, just cold, deliberate menace. Graves cursed. "They're getting bold." Poirot's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "Non, Inspector, they are growing desperate." Charlotte clasped her throat. "You think the killer is one of us, in this very room?" Poirot met her gaze. "My dear, I do not think I know." Silence fell like a guillotine. Poirot placed the note beside the cigarette case. "Observe, the handwriting is carefully disguised, yet the pressure, the angle, the slant, these betray the writer." Victor Harwood's eyes narrowed. "Show us, then. Make your accusation." Poirot held up a finger. "Patience, monsieur. The little grey cells require time." He motioned to Inspector Graves. "Please take statements again from each suspect, alone. Something has shifted. Tonight they will reveal more than they intend." The suspects dispersed reluctantly. Poirot remained in the study, pacing slowly. His reflection flickered in the rain-streaked window. He replayed each reaction. Charlotte's fear, Oliver's unease, Helena's calculated curiosity, Victor's simmering resentment, Mrs. Langford's trembling confession of devotion to the victim's memory. Something in their collective responses felt off, too synchronized, as though they were each aware of the other's secrets. Graves returned an hour later. "Statements taken, but there's a development." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A second note, slipped under Charlotte's bedroom door." He handed it over. "The blame belongs to you. Confess before they force your hand." Charlotte, Graves said, had collapsed into tears. Poirot examined the note. Same style, same ink, same deliberate disguise. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "the killer is not only planting evidence, but attempting to corner the true target." "What target?" Graves asked. Poirot looked out the window, his reflection hardening. "Charlotte Farnham, someone is determined to destroy her, either by law or by terror." The inspector frowned. "But why her?" Poirot turned slowly. "Because she knows something, perhaps without realizing it, and the murderer fears what she might remember." A knock sounded at the door. Helena Vale stepped in, her notebook tucked under one arm. "Poirot, there's something you should know, something I didn't mention earlier." Graves stiffened. "You withheld information?" Helena exhaled shakily. "Not intentionally. I wasn't sure it mattered." Poirot gestured. "Please, mademoiselle." She approached, lowering her voice. "The night before Whitcomb's death, I overheard him arguing with someone on the telephone. He kept saying, 'You promised me the truth. You owe me that much.' And then he said a name." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Whose name?" Helena hesitated. "Charlotte's." The storm outside rumbled in perfect punctuation. Poirot stepped closer, his voice a velvet blade. "Mademoiselle Vale, this is vital. Why did you delay telling me this?" Her cheeks flushed. "Because I thought Charlotte was innocent, and I didn't want to be the one to cast suspicion unfairly. Her life has been hard enough." Poirot nodded slowly. "Your compassion is admirable, but facts do not bow to emotion." He turned to Graves. "We must speak to Charlotte again, immediately." But before they could leave the study, the lights flickered. Footsteps rushed down the hallway. A scream pierced the manor's echoing corridors. Poirot and Graves bolted toward the sound. At the bottom of the staircase, Charlotte Farnham stood trembling, pointing toward the landing above. Her voice was barely a whisper. He pushed her over the railing." Poirot looked up. A figure lay crumpled on the marble floor, motionless. As he rushed to the fallen body, Poirot felt the terrible click of realization. The killer was no longer content with threats. The murderer had made their first move toward silencing the truth forever. Chapter 7. A Voice in the Dark. The manor erupted into chaos as Helena Vale's body lay motionless at the foot of the staircase, her limbs twisted at angles too cruel to be an accident. Poirot knelt beside her, his fingers brushing the pulse point at her neck. The silence in the hallway deepened as the truth settled with bitter weight. "She is alive," he said at last, though his voice was grim, "but only just. We must get her to the hospital immediately." Graves barked orders to the constables. Within minutes, Helena was carried out on a stretcher, her once calm face pale and slack. Charlotte, clinging to the banister, looked ready to collapse. Poirot approached her gently. "Mademoiselle, you said someone pushed her. Did you see who?" Charlotte shook her head, her voice thin as tissue. No, I only heard Helena cry out. When I came around the corner, I saw a shadow, someone running up the stairs. I couldn't see their face." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "A shadow, yes. In this house, the shadows grow very talkative when one learns how to listen." Victor Harwood stepped forward, jaw clenched. "Poirot, are we to believe this was attempted murder? Perhaps Helena slipped. The staircase is steep." Poirot regarded him with cool precision. "Monsieur Harwood, nothing in this house slips by accident." Victor stiffened, but said nothing more. Poirot motioned for Graves to follow him into the study. Once the door shut, the detective pressed his fingertips together. "This attack tells us two things, Inspector. First, the murderer grows fearful. Second, Helena Vale had come too close to a truth meant to remain buried." Graves paced restlessly. She told us Whitcomb spoke Charlotte's name before his death. You think that was the reason for the attack?" Poirot nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps she knew something else. Something she herself had not yet understood. Knowledge is a dangerous thing, Inspector, especially when wielded unknowingly. Thunder grumbled above the manor, shaking loose dust from ancient rafters. Poirot's thoughts moved swiftly, stitching together fragments of hidden truths. Graves rubbed his temples. "Where do we go from here?" Poirot turned toward the window. "We return to the beginning. We examine every step, every word, every whisper. And then we go further back, into the past of these people who live here. For it is in the past that motive forms, and in motive that murder ripens." A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Langford entered, wringing a lace handkerchief between trembling fingers. "Mr. Poirot, I hate to intrude, but I found something in Helena's room." Poirot straightened. "Show me." The housekeeper led them up the staircase to Helena's chamber. Rain beat against the glass, smearing the world into wavering shapes. On the writing desk lay a folded piece of paper. "I found it tucked under the lamp," Mrs. Langford whispered. "I believe it is important." Poirot opened the note. The handwriting was hurried, jagged, written by a hand trembling with urgency. "I know the truth at last. Whitcomb was right. It all comes back to the meeting in London, and to the woman he feared most." Beneath it, the ink trailed into a broken line, as though she had been interrupted. Graves frowned. A meeting in London, and a woman he feared? Could be Charlotte. Poirot shook his head. "Do not jump so quickly to conclusions, Inspector. The murderer counts on such haste." He examined the ink, touching the edge with his fingertip. Fresh. She wrote this minutes before she fell, or was pushed. Mrs. Langford swayed, her face pinched. "Oh, heavens, what have we become?" Poirot's tone softened. "Courage, madame. Even in the darkest house, the truth carries its own lantern." The housekeeper nodded shakily and slipped out. Graves scratched his chin. "If Helena discovered something, we need to know where she got it. Did she speak to any of the suspects alone?" Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Let us ask them." They gathered the remaining suspects in the drawing room, where the fire cast unsteady shadows on the walls. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "One among you tried to kill Helena Vale. Before the night is done, I intend to know who." Oliver Ashcombe swallowed visibly. "Monsieur Poirot, we are all frightened, but you cannot expect us to remain calm when one of us is accused." Poirot tilted his head. "Monsieur Ashcombe, fear makes one speak more truth than one intends. Tell me, did you speak with Mademoiselle Vale tonight before the attack?" Oliver hesitated, then nodded. "She asked me about the archives, about the records Mr. Whitcomb kept from his years in London. I told her they were destroyed in the fire last year." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A convenient fire." Oliver flushed. "It was an accident. I wasn't even here." Poirot let the statement hang in the air before turning to Mrs. Langford. "And you, madame? Did Helena confide in you?" Mrs. Langford dabbed her eyes. Only that she felt someone was watching her. She did not know who. Victor Harwood stood stiffly in the corner, arms crossed. Poirot regarded him last. "And you, monsieur?" Victor's jaw tightened. "I exchanged no words with her. I was in the billiard room." Poirot released a soft sigh. "Ah, the billiard room. A room with 2 doors, one of which leads conveniently to the servants' staircase." Victor bristled. "Are you accusing me?" "I am observing," Poirot replied calmly. "Always observing." Charlotte sat silently, by the window, hands trembling in her lap. Poirot moved toward her. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "did Helena speak to you after our conversation in the study?" Charlotte looked up slowly, eyes hollow. She told me she believed in my innocence, that she would help me prove it. She said she was close to understanding why Mr. Whitcomb used my name in his last days. Poirot studied her face. "And how did that make you feel?" "Terrified," Charlotte whispered, "because if she was wrong, if something from my past was truly connected, then I do not know what darkness I might be part of." Poirot laid a hand lightly on the back of her chair. "We shall learn the truth together." A sudden knock echoed from the hallway, urgent, sharp. Constable Hensley burst into the room, rain dripping from his coat. "Sir, a message just came from the hospital." Everyone stilled. Hensley caught his breath. "Helena Vale. She woke up, only for a moment. She spoke a few words before passing out again." Poirot stepped forward, eyes burning with focus. "What did she say, Constable?" Hensley swallowed hard. "She said, the woman, the one he feared, she is here." The room seemed to tighten around them. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with meaning. "Then the killer walks these halls still, and tonight she knows we are closing in." Chapter 8. The Woman He Feared. The manor felt suspended between breaths, the walls holding a tension so taut one could almost hear it hum. Poirot walked the dim corridor alone, his steps slow and deliberate. The constable's message circled in his thoughts like a hawk. "The woman he feared! She is here!" The words were a match struck in a dark forest, revealing shapes once hidden. Stormlight flickered through stained glass windows, scattering fractured colours across the floor. Poirot paused before one such window, hands clasped behind his back, moustaches angled sharply downward. Somewhere in this house, a woman carried a truth dangerous enough to kill for. And Whitcomb, whatever secrets he held, had feared her enough to die with her shadow upon his mind. Inspector Graves approached from the stairs. "She's still unconscious. Doctors don't know when, if, she'll wake again." Poirot nodded, though the news drew a narrow line of concern across his brow. "We must act without her testimony. We have clues, subtle, but enough." Graves sighed. "Then tell me plainly, which woman do you think Helena meant?" Poirot gave a soft, weary smile. "Ah, Inspector, if I tell you before I have proof, you will accuse me of chasing phantoms. No, let us first confirm what the clues whisper." They moved down to the study, where the fire still burned low. The cigarette case, the threatening notes, the half-written message Helena had left. Poirot stood over them as though reading a confession. "Consider the psychology," he murmured. "A murderer who hides behind disguise, planting clues against another woman. A murderer who writes notes meant to terrify, not simply mislead. A murderer who feels watched, and therefore strikes before being named." Graves frowned. "You're thinking, Charlotte?" Poirot raised a finger. "Non, Inspector. But the murderer wants us to think so. That is the key." He turned to the fireplace, watching the flames twist and coil. "The real question is, whose life is bound most tightly to Whitcomb's? Who among these women carries a past entwined with his in London?" A knock startled them both. Mrs. Langford stepped in, holding a shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Mr. Poirot, there is something I can no longer keep silent." Her voice quivered, but something resolute pushed beneath it. "I heard Miss Vale speak earlier today. She was in the hallway, speaking softly, almost to herself. She said she believed one woman here had been lying about her connection to Mr. Whitcomb." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Who?" Mrs. Langford hesitated, glancing toward the door as if the walls themselves might betray her. She said, "The quiet one hides the loudest secret." "That is all." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Merci, madame. You have done the right thing." The housekeeper slipped out quickly, as though escaping her own conscience. Graves scratched his head. "The quiet one? Charlotte is quiet, yes, but so is Mrs. Langford herself." Poirot shook his head. "No, Inspector. Charlotte is fragile, frightened, but she does not hide her fear. Mrs. Langford is timid, yet too transparent in her grief. There is another whose quietness is curated, intentional." Graves blinked. "Helena?" "Not quiet, Inspector, observant. There is a difference." Poirot turned toward the hallway. "We must speak with Oliver Ashcombe." They found Oliver in the library, turning a large brandy glass slowly in his hand. When he saw them, his expression faltered. "Poirot, I heard the news about Helena. Terrible business." Poirot studied him carefully. "Terrible indeed. Tell me, monsieur, how long did you know Mr. Whitcomb?" Oliver swallowed. 8 years. I managed portions of his research archive." "And during the London period?" Oliver hesitated. "Only a little. I handled administrative tasks." Poirot stepped closer. "And what of the women in his life? Did he have entanglements?" Oliver stiffened, glancing toward the door. "I wouldn't know about that." "Would you not? Yet you burned the archive that contained such records." Oliver's hand trembled around the glass. "It was an accident. I told you that." Poirot nodded slowly. "So you said. Yet Helena Vale believed those records held the key to Whitcomb's fear." Oliver's eyes widened faintly before he masked it. "A small slip, but Poirot caught it. Tell me, monsieur," Poirot pressed gently, "which woman in this manner did Whitcomb fear most?" Oliver's voice cracked. Why would I know that?" "Because," Poirot said softly, "you hesitated when we asked about his past, and hesitation is the shadow cast by truth." Oliver set the glass down hard. "You're twisting my words. I don't know anything." Poirot took a slow breath. "Then allow me to ask differently. Which woman visited Whitcomb in London? Not socially, secretly." Oliver's face drained of colour. Graves stepped forward sharply. "Tell us, Ashcombe." Oliver's shoulders sagged. He moved to the bookshelf, leaning heavily against it. "All right," he whispered, "but it wasn't my secret to reveal. Whitcomb met with Mrs. Langford, often. He helped her through some legal trouble. She was indebted to him, that's all." Poirot frowned. "Mrs. Langford? But she claimed to have barely known him during that period." "Then she lied," Oliver said bitterly. "She wasn't always the timid, trembling woman you see now." Poirot exchanged a glance with Graves. "And Charlotte? Did Whitcomb know her from London as well?" Oliver hesitated again. "That I don't know." Poirot stepped forward, voice soft but razor-sharp. "Monsieur Ashcombe, you are protecting someone. Who?" Oliver looked at him, anguish twisting his features. "Poirot, please, if I speak someone will be destroyed." Poirot's expression remained gentle. "Monsieur, if you do not speak someone will be killed." The man broke. "Fine," he choked out. "It wasn't Mrs. Langford Whitcomb feared. It was..." A scream shattered the air. Poirot spun, racing towards the source. The cry had come from the west corridor. He and Graves followed the echo, boots thundering across polished floors. They reached Charlotte's room. The door was flung open. Charlotte stood against the far wall, hands over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. On the floor lay a torn envelope and a single sheet of paper. Poirot seized it. A message, scrawled in the same disguised hand. "No more warnings. The truth dies tonight." Graves cursed under his breath. Poirot looked up, and froze. The window latch was unhooked. Rain blew inward, scattering droplets across the carpet. Footprints, small, delicate, led toward the sill. A woman had stood here moments before, a woman who had fled into the storm. Poirot felt the final piece shifting into place. "Inspector," he whispered, voice low and certain, "the woman Whitcomb feared, she is no longer hiding." Graves swallowed. "You know who she is?" Poirot nodded once. "Yes, and at last the murderer has revealed her hand." Chapter 9. Through the storm rain lashed the manor like 1,000 frantic fingers tapping at the windows, the storm outside roaring with a ferocity that felt almost personal. Poirot stood at the open window of Charlotte's room, the wind tugging at his coat, his sharp eyes fixed on the dark garden below. The footprints on the sill were already softening under the rain, but the direction was unmistakable, toward the old conservatory. Graves leaned beside him, squinting through the downpour. She escaped out there, in this storm. That's madness. Poirot shook his head. "Non, Inspector. It is desperation. A murderer cornered does not behave with reason." Charlotte whimpered behind them, clutching her shawl. "You said you know who it is. Tell us, Poirot, please." Poirot turned, his expression gentler now, though edged with urgency. "Mademoiselle, trust in this. The woman who wishes you destroyed is not the one whose tears fall easily." Before she could respond, he moved for the door. "Inspector, come. We must follow her before she disappears into the night." They descended the staircase and stepped outside into the storm. The wind howled across the grounds, bending branches and tearing leaves from their limbs. Poirot shielded his eyes with a hand, scanning the distance. The conservatory loomed at the garden's edge, an old structure of iron and glass, its silhouette trembling under the wind's assault. Graves cursed as mud swallowed his boots. "She could be anywhere." Poirot pointed. "Look to the light, Inspector, even the desperate need to see." A faint flickering glow pulsed from within the conservatory, just enough to betray a presence. They approached cautiously. Rain hammered the glass, turning it opaque in places, but Poirot could make out a moving shadow inside. He paused at the door, hand hovering mere inches from the handle. "Are you ready, Inspector?" Graves nodded, soaking wet but resolute. Poirot pushed the door open. The conservatory's interior shimmered with storm-lit reflections. Plants shuddered under the draughts of cold air, their leaves rustling like whispers. And at the far end, near a table cluttered with gardening tools, stood Mrs. Langford. Though stood was a fragile word for the trembling figure she had become. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Her hair fell in wet strands across her face. But in her eyes burned something sharp, something not timid at all. Graves inhaled sharply. "Mrs. Langford." She lifted the lantern in her shaking hand. Its light trembled over her face. "Please," she croaked, "don't come closer." Poirot took one step forward, his voice soft as velvet. "Madam, the moment has come to end this suffering. No more running." Her lips curled into a broken laugh. "Running, Monsieur Poirot? I have been running all my life." She lowered the lantern to the table, her shoulders collapsing with exhaustion. Poirot approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "I know what happened in London," he said gently. "I know about the case Whitcomb helped you through. I know he protected you. But I also know he feared someone else." Mrs. Langford looked up sharply. "You think it was me he feared? No, you are wrong." Poirot nodded slightly. "Agree. Whitcomb did not fear you. He pitied you. He rescued you." Mrs. Langford's expression twisted. "Then why am I here? Why are you hunting me?" "I am not hunting you," Poirot replied. "I am here to protect you, from yourself." Her breath hitched. Poirot leaned closer. "You know who the murderer is. That is why she tried to silence Helena, why she terrorized Charlotte, why she has shadowed this house with lies." Mrs. Langford swallowed hard. For a moment, silence overtook the room, broken only by the drumming storm. Then, with trembling hands, she reached beneath the table and withdrew something, an old, battered journal. She thrust it toward Poirot. This is why," she whispered. "Everything is written here. Whitcomb kept notes. He never stopped searching for her." Poirot opened the journal. Names, dates, locations, references to a woman dangerous, persuasive, and merciless. Notes about blackmail, manipulation, a sketch of a woman's necklace. And then, one entry circled in red ink. "She has come to Surrey. She is closer than ever." Graves squinted over Poirot's shoulder. "But who is she?" Mrs. Langford's voice cracked like thin ice. "Helena Vale." Graves reeled back. "The journalist. She was the one who fell. She's the victim." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, Inspector. She was the hunter. Whitcomb feared her because she ruined lives through her stories, destroyed reputations, exposed secrets, manipulated truth into weapons." He tapped the journal, "And she sought Whitcomb because he refused to give her information she wanted. She threatened him, pressured him, perhaps blackmailed him." Graves's eyes widened. "Then why target Charlotte?" "Because Charlotte was the one Whitcomb confided in," Poirot said. "The only one he trusted. Helena could not allow that connection to survive." Mrs. Langford shivered, hugging herself. "But I found Helena at the stairs. I screamed because I thought she was dead." Poirot stepped closer, placing a steady hand over hers. "Madame, Helena's fall was no accident. Someone else pushed her." Mrs. Langford blinked. "Someone else?" Poirot's gaze darkened. "Yes, the true murderer, the woman Whitcomb feared, the one Helena hoped to expose. And Helena, in her last lucid moment, spoke the truth. She is here." He closed the journal gently. "And she still is." A sudden crash echoed from behind them. Graves spun. "What was that?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The murderer does not intend to let us walk out with this journal." The lantern flickered as a figure moved outside the glass walls. Sleek, deliberate, unmistakably feminine. Poirot slipped the journal into his coat. "Inspector, prepare yourself. The final game begins now." Lightning lit the room in a violent flash, illuminating the silhouette beyond the glass. The silhouette of a woman watching them, waiting and ready to strike. Chapter 10. The Final Unveiling. The drawing-room of Greyminster Manor was heavy with the scent of aged wood and the faint perfume of lilies, their petals catching the last golden rays of the afternoon sun that streamed through the tall, narrow windows. Outside, the wind whispered against the sprawling estate, rustling leaves as though nature itself awaited the revelation that Poirot was about to deliver. The assembled household, a motley collection of suspects, friends, and uneasy witnesses, sat rigidly in their chairs, each face taut with apprehension. Poirot, small and precise as ever, adjusted his perfectly waxed moustache and cast a measured glance over the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft yet penetrating, "we have reached the moment where truth must confront pretense." For weeks the manor had been a stage of shadows. The death of Lord Edmund Greyminster had confounded the local constabulary, and the servants whispered nervously of hidden passageways and unseen eyes. Poirot had examined every corner, questioned every reticent tongue, and followed the faintest scent of motive through the corridors of human deceit. The detective's mind, meticulous and unyielding, had pieced together the puzzle from the smallest fragments. A smudged footprint in the library, the faint trace of a perfume that did not belong, and the subtle inconsistencies in each suspect's narrative. Today all threads would converge. He gestured toward the suspects seated before him. Lady Violet Greyminster, her elegance barely masking the tremor in her hands. Charles Brenton, Lord Greyminster's business partner, whose calm demeanour seemed almost rehearsed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Weatherby, a woman of severe countenance and sharp eyes. And the young secretary, Thomas Carr, whose nervous glances had betrayed far more than he intended. Each had played a role, knowingly or unwittingly, in the drama that had unfolded within these walls. Poirot's eyes settled on Lady Violet first. "Madame, you were quick to assume control of the household after Lord Greyminster's unfortunate demise. Yet, your knowledge of certain confidential documents suggests a familiarity that was peculiar for one of your station. Would you care to explain?" Violet's lips pressed into a thin line, but she made no immediate reply, her gaze darting to the floor. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, a subtle instrument in his orchestration. Turning smoothly to Charles Brenton, Poirot continued, "Monsieur Brenton, your financial interests in Lord Greyminster's ventures were considerable. A man of such prudence would not risk exposure lightly. Yet we discovered discrepancies in the ledgers, entries that suggest an intention to obscure certain transactions. Perhaps these were matters of mere bookkeeping, no?" Charles shook his head, the faintest twitch of a smile betraying irritation at being suspected, yet he offered no defence. Mrs. Weatherby, for all her stern composure, seemed to shrink beneath Poirot's gaze. "Madam," he said gently, "you know the manner better than any. You see what the guests do not, hear what the visitors hope to conceal. And yet, a certain item, the silver dagger from the display cabinet, went missing the night of the tragedy. Who removed it, if not one who walks your familiar corridors?" The housekeeper's eyes darted around, calculating and wary, her knuckles tightening around the arms of her chair. Finally, Poirot's attention turned to Thomas Carr. The young man's pulse seemed audible even in the hushed room. "And you, Monsieur Carr, you presented yourself as merely a secretary. Yet it was you who had unrestricted access to Lord Greyminster's private study. You, who might have overheard conversations that others did not, and who could manipulate correspondence without detection. Ah, but appearances deceive." The secretary swallowed, eyes wide, as though the very air had thickened around him. Poirot walked slowly between them, the shuffle of his shoes punctuating his words. "Mes amis, the crime that occurred in this very house was not one of passion, nor of happenstance. It was a crime born of necessity and fear of exposure, fear of disgrace, and fear of losing what one believes is rightfully one's own. And it is here, in this precise moment, that we separate truth from pretense." He paused, surveying the faces. "The truth is never complicated, n'est-ce pas? It is only the human desire to obscure it that creates the illusion of complexity." He reached into his pocket and produced a small envelope, placing it carefully on the table. Inside this envelope is a letter, penned by the hand of our unfortunate Lord Greyminster. It details the arrangement and threats that each of you were involved in, directly or indirectly. The dagger, the ledger, the confidential papers, all instruments in a game of power that grew beyond control. And the identity of the perpetrator, that is what must be unveiled. A tension so thick it could be cut with a knife filled the room. Poirot opened the envelope letting the paper fall gently onto the table. Mesdames et messieurs, the murderer is none other than he let the words hang in the air for a fraction longer, giving the assembled a moment of suspense that drew their breaths tight. Charles Brenton! A collective gasp erupted. Charles's composure cracked, revealing a flash of rage before he attempted to smile, perhaps hoping to charm his way out of the trap. Poirot raised a hand, forestalling any protest. You may speak, monsieur, but the evidence is undeniable. Your manipulation of the ledgers, your covert visits to the study, and the misdirection intended to implicate others all align perfectly with the sequence of events. You sought to secure Lord Greyminster's fortune by eliminating the one obstacle, and yet overlooked the most minute details. Details that only a mind trained in the little grey cells could detect. Charles finally spoke, voice tight with frustration. You have no proof. Only speculation, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, but the proof is not in speculation, it is in observation. The dagger, discovered hidden behind the false panel in the library, bore traces of your cologne, a scent that you failed to account for. The ledger, when examined with the proper scrutiny, revealed entries that only someone intimately familiar with the numbers could manipulate. And the testimonies of your colleagues, when properly interpreted, exposed inconsistencies that you cannot explain away. Every action you took, monsieur, has been meticulously observed and recorded by a careful mind. Charles's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. Poirot straightened, letting the satisfaction of revelation settle into the room. Justice, mes amis, is not merely the punishment of crime, but the illumination of truth. And now, with the truth revealed, we can restore order to Greyminster Manor and honour the memory of its rightful lord. The room remained silent for a long moment, the weight of confession and relief mingling in the golden light. Poirot's small form, precise and serene, seemed almost luminous amidst the tension that had finally begun to ease. Lady Violet let out a quiet sigh. Mrs. Weatherby's stern expression softened imperceptibly, and Thomas Carr slumped in relief, having survived suspicion. Outside, the wind's whisper seemed to echo Poirot's sentiment, carrying the message that even in a house of secrets, clarity would always prevail. Poirot turned to Lady Violet, his voice gentle. Madame, you have borne much with dignity. It is not only courage, but patience and reason that see us through times of darkness. She inclined her head, tears glistening in her eyes, the first genuine smile of relief touching her lips. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the manor, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The case was concluded, the guilty revealed, and the fragile peace of Greyminster Manor restored. Yet, as always, he knew the human heart would continue to weave mysteries of its own, waiting for the keen eye and the little grey cells to bring light to their shadows. For now, however, there was triumph in resolution, and in the quiet, enduring victory of truth.